What's up, everybody? It's Jordan, and welcome to the Sports Behind Show. Today is March 15th, 2022, and this is day two of kind of like a free agency special. Yesterday, I was on here talking about some of the moves the Bengals made and a couple moves they did not make. And joining me in today's video is Frank Laplaca, host of the Unofficial Bengals podcast. How you doing today, Frank?
All right, Jordan. Glad to be here. There's a lot of action in the NFL right now, and I'm dying to talk about it.
You know, there's so many moves the Bengals have made, and it's a couple moves people kind of were surprised that they did not make. You know, obviously CG Uzomah kind of tops that list. We'll kind of get into that later. But some of these moves the Bengals made yesterday. The Bengals signed Ted Carris, an interior offensive lineman who mainly plays center, but last year he played guard for the most part. Coming from New England to a 3-year deal worth $18 million. What are your thoughts on that signing for Cincinnati, signing Ted Carris to a 3-year deal?
Well, you know what? I was looking at the centers that were available, and there weren't that many, and they went quick. So there weren't many options unless we're going to go after the first-round center. What is it, Linderbaum in the draft? I mean, maybe that'll happen. But because it was so minimal on who was left out there, I understand why they wanted to go for someone who didn't have a crazy high price tag and came from a good system. So, you know, I don't know that much about Ted Carris because I'm not studying the Patriots offensive line, but he is coming from a good system. He's been there. He was a center for Tom Brady, I believe, for a year or so. So, that's a decent pedigree to me. And all due respect to Trey Hopkins, I think that this is probably an upgrade.
Yeah, and when you look at him, playing left guard, playing center, playing right guard, that could really help the Bengals. The situation of a guy goes down, maybe he can switch positions and stuff like that. And when you look at his PFF grade, last year, I believe it was 72.8. Hopkins was like mid-50s. Like, it was horrible for Hopkins. It's a significant upgrade. And it's interesting because, there's been talks. I'm not really a fan of it. But with Ted Carris, he's going to be our center this year. Maybe there's a scenario where Trey Hopkins would play guard. I'm not really for that decision because, in my opinion, I think Hopkins is a better center than he is a guard. And, I mean, we saw this past season with Hopkins really struggling at center. I cannot imagine him playing guard. I just don't really like that fit for him. But Ted Carris, I think it's a great signing for us. I mean, looking at some of these, stats here for him, I mean, he's phenomenal. I think it's a great deal. Over 2,000 snaps at center. Just under 400 at right guard, and just over 700 at left guard. So a guy who's very versatile, can play all the interior offensive line positions. It's a great signing for Cincinnati. And it's one of those guys who kind of just, flew under the radar. Nobody really talked about him much. I saw his name on a couple of different mentions for Cincinnati like a month ago, but I thought he was going to re-sign with New England. But I'm really happy, despite us not signing Ryan Jensen, that most people thought was going to happen. Tom Brady coming out of retirement, obviously that probably had a big factor in that. But despite us striking out on Ryan Jensen, I still think we kind of hit a home run signing here with Ted Carris.
Yeah, I do agree on that. And, he went back to the Buccaneers for like $13 million a year. And, that's a lot of money if you want to try to sign other free agents. You kind of have to pick and choose who's going to be your big ticket guy. And I don't think that they wanted to make him the big ticket guy. So we got a guy at basically half the price. And also with Trey Hopkins, I don't necessarily trust him as a starting guard either. And I know he did that early in his career and he struggled a little bit. So I'm thinking he's going to go with the Trey Waynes way of, get rid of Waynes and save about $11 million, probably cut Hopkins and save $6 million there as well. So, I mean, even though we had so much cap space, we still need the money because everyone's anybody worth it is a high ticket free agent. And we have a lot of our own to sign as well, which is going to take up some of that cap. And you have to save, $8-9 million for the draft picks. So, we were in a good cap position, but it goes very quickly.
You mentioned Trey Waynes. When you look at some of the people around the league, it's kind of surprising that they got, released. For example, look at the Browns. They released Jarvis Landry yesterday, and they shocked everybody and released center J.C. Treader, who the Bengals should absolutely go after. Kind of talk about that in a little bit. But when you have these Pro Bowl type of caliber players, Hecker, the punter for the Rams, got released, kind of surprising people. When you look at guys like that who came out of nowhere getting cut, nobody thought it was going to happen. And then you look at a guy like Trey Waynes. We as Bengal fans, really hope he gets released. He hasn't done anything for us. He would save so much money for us. If we release him, we'll save like $10 or $11 million. It's one of those things you think it's going to happen, but if I'm the Bengals, I would just hurry up and cut him so you can get that money. Because when you look at guys like Leo Collins, who is in the trade market, but there's rumors also the Dallas Cowboys might end up releasing Collins, which if you're the Bengals, you have to go all over that. And you look at some of these other guys, maybe some more offensive linemen, a guy like Andrew Norwell, I like quite a bit. When you have these different offensive linemen or just different players in general who can really elevate your team, you already have a great team. But if you have a chance to get better, you obviously do that. And if you release Trey Waynes and also throw Trey Hopkins in there, I mean, that's over $15 million you save.
Yeah.
They need to go ahead and cut those guys so we can have that money and sign some of these guys before everybody's gone.
And you're right. We saw on day one, a lot of the good offensive linemen are gone. Like I made a list of people and I kept having to change it. Even, today, like a guy like James Daniels got signed and, you're starting to see those second tier guys go. So there's not a lot left there. And going back to your point about teams releasing players that are still valuable, it's all cap related. If you look at the teams that are releasing good players, those are teams that are in negative cap numbers. And honestly, I don't like how teams can restructure deals. It just feels like you're cheating the system. And you're looking at all these teams like the Saints did it with a bunch of people. The Packers did it with a bunch of people. And rather than having to cut people, they just creatively manipulated their cap number, front loading, back loading, whatever, however they do it mathematically. And I don't know, it just feels like a real bending of the rules. And that's what, as you said, we're seeing a lot of these good players get cut. That's part one of it. But part two is there's a lot of restructuring going on that kind of wish they would police a little bit better.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said there. And you mentioned Cap a couple of times. And, the Bengals' next player they signed was Kappa, Alex Kappa, the right guard from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This one was another one of those signings where you didn't really hear any rumors, didn't hear any talks of it, and then just all of a sudden happened. I don't know. I don't know how to describe this. I'm not going to say the Bengals panicked because this was a really good signing, but maybe it's one of those scenarios where, we already saw Ryan Jensen. I know it's a different position. You struck out on him. You want to hurry up and get that top offensive lineman. If you can just get one, it was worth it. And they definitely got it. And, Alex Kappa, a guy who's played over 1,000 snaps the last 2 seasons, did not allow a single sack in the 2020 season, only had 1 penalty last year. And that's something to really look at when you're the Bengals. The Bengals a couple years ago had quite a bit of penalties. This past season, we're the least penalized team in the NFL. And when you get a guy like Alex Kappa, who's been around the league for several years, only had 1 penalty last season, did not give up sack the year prior, and, has Super Bowl experience. I know the Bengals have Super Bowl experience, and it's just weird to say. But despite that, we're still one of the youngest teams in the NFL. So getting a guy like Alex Kappa for a 4-year deal worth $40 million, I think that's a tremendous signing for Cincinnati. And it's one of those guys who, you didn't really hear much, but after the more you read about him, I think it's a tremendous signing for Cincinnati.
Yeah, and he wasn't one of those huge names coming out into free agency, but you all knew how good that Buccaneers line was the last year or two. And he was a key member of it. Yeah, we needed a guard. We needed interior help, and we chased 2 of them. And Jordan, as we were talking about before we went on, last year we struck gold with Hilton and Awuzie, getting them for the price of William Jackson. And I think we got these 2 guys for the price of some of the higher price guys. Like Brandon Sheriff went for like $17 million a year. A bunch of the marquee offensive linemen were getting about $13 million a year. So here we are able to sign 2 of them for about 15, 16. We struck gold with it last year. So I understand why they wanted to take the chance. And honestly, they're 2 very good players. So we've upgraded the line, but the work is still not done.
And when you look at our, offensive line group, I would say, in my opinion, throughout last season, right guard was definitely our worst position. And when you look at it, Alex Kappa this past season had a 71.9 PFF grade. Hakeem Adeniji had a 43. That is insane. It's nearly a 30 grade difference. It is unheard of. And the fact that you get him, and obviously you get Ted Carris, you have your center and your right guard, 2 positions that desperately need upgraded. And it looks like I would assume that Trey Hopkins will probably be released, and that saves another $5 million. And when you look at it that way, with the Bengals signing Ted Carris, and so that's $6 million per season. When the Bengals, more than likely release Trey Hopkins, you're basically almost canceling that out in a way by getting a significant better player in Ted Karras over Trey Hopkins. But, with Alex Capa as well, when you look at some of those other guys, like you mentioned, these guards who, Joe Thuney was making 15 or 16 million last season. At some point, I think it's better to get a guy who's not the top tier guy, maybe get a middle of the pack guy, because you can get two of those guys for the premier guy, kind of like you're mentioning. But both of these signings are under the radar. I think they're both great signings for Cincinnati.
Yeah, and they're guys that, from what I've seen, have been pretty durable, so that's good as well. And, now it's and I know we're not really going to go into the draft too much, but when you look at the available free agents and the signings here, we're probably likely to target tackle in the draft more so than guard. And there's a lot more. I was looking at what guards and what tackles had first round grades and second round grades. And there's about 4 guards that fall into that range. There's 5, but we don't have a shot at one of them. And there's about 8 or 9 tackles that fall in that range. Maybe 2 or 3 we don't have a shot at. But it's looking like, tackle might be what we do in the draft unless we go for Tehran Armstead. But that's a lot of money. And really, if we sign him, we're going to have to cut other people and not re-sign some of our own as well. So we're going to have to really see what we want to do. I don't know if we're going to bring back Eli Apple and Flowers, but those guys are going to command a few million a year. And if you go for someone like Armstead, you might not be able to afford those guys. But believe me, bring in Armstead as a left tackle. I'm totally down with that over Eli Apple and Trey Flowers. But I'm just saying, if we're going to go for him, we don't have this unlimited money. You think going in, we have almost 70 million when we cut Wayne's. And like I said, it goes quick and it's not as much as you think it is when it breaks down. And someone like Armstead has an injury history. And like, I don't doubt that he can come in and be dominant and stay healthy, but you just don't know. And we got burned on Wayne's with that. And if we were to drop 18 to 20 million on Armstead and he's only playing a handful of games, that's very detrimental to our team and our cap.
Yeah, Tehran Armstead, it's one of those guys heading in the free agency. Everybody was talking about, him and Leo Collins, the right tackle, as of now with the Cowboys. But Armstead, to me, he's one of those guys, kind of like Joe Thuney. Everybody was just so fixated on him. And it's one of those situations, I want to hate Tehran Armstead signing with the Bengals, but it's one of those things, he has an injury issue coming with us. He's been injured in the past, like you mentioned. He's never played a full 16 games, and he's going to make 18 to 22 million. And my thing with him, him playing left tackle, that means Jonah Williams is going to play right tackle, and more likely. And you look at Jonah Williams, in my opinion, if Jonah Williams was drafted as a 3rd or 4th round pick, I feel like more Bengal fans will be talking about maybe we need to find a replacement for Williams. In my opinion, he was a top 15 pick for us a couple years ago in the first round. I know he's not played a ton, but he's not played nearly as good as people think he has. He's not played a single snap his rookie year. His second season, he played 10 games because he had a shoulder injury. So, you missed your whole season, rookie season, getting hurt. You missed 6 games your second season. And then your third season, this past year, he gave up 10 sacks. And I think he has potential, but it's one of those things I feel like Bengal fans kind of overrate him a little bit just because he's a top premier pick when you have some of these other guys who we've seen in the past who can be, mid-round picks, play really, really good. Clip Bowling, a guy like him who was serviceable and a nice lineman, was a mid-round pick, and he was fine. But when you look at Jonah Williams, he has not even been close to the hype and the potential that he has. And him not really playing good, in my opinion, at left tackle, switching him to right tackle, I don't really feel comfortable with that much, and especially with Tehran Armstead coming at left tackle. I know he's great, but his injury history, and you look at Jonah Williams' injury history, I know he wasn't hurt this past season. That's kind of a problem. And with the interior offensive lineman, it looks like we have that, those spots, down with, signings and everything. It's still very interesting, but you did also mention, Flowers and Eli Apple. I wouldn't mind, having them coming back. I would totally understand, you saying you'd rather have Armstead than some of those guys, but it's very interesting. And we've already had a couple of big signings, and I wouldn't be shocked if we had maybe 1 or 2 big more signings as well.
Yeah, and going back to Jonah, and it's unfortunate because the Bengals are very high on him because he was a high pick. If you ever hear him talk, he's a very intelligent, very likable guy. He's got technique. He's got a good pedigree coming out of college. And, sometimes as a broadcaster, and maybe you encounter this yourself, it's hard to diss on these guys because I don't want to get a bad name with the players. Some of these players are going to be coming on my show, and I hate to be that shallow about it. So sometimes it's really tough to say what you feel. And I respect the fact that you did say what you feel. And I agree. You know, Jonah Williams, do I like him? Yes. Do I want him to be the best left tackle in football? Yes, I do. Has he underperformed? Very much so. And what's going to happen when he goes to right tackle? A, you have the injury issues that you mentioned that could crop up. B, right tackles typically are a little bit bigger than him, a little more of a mauler, you know, a little more of a run guy than him. And then now there's a built-in excuse if he struggles. Well, you know, he's a left tackle. He's not used to playing on the right side. So there's a lot of things that go into that, where I think the Bengals are just going to have him play left tackle next year, regardless, because they're sold on him, unless they get some dynamite draft pick who outplays him. Or, like you said, I mean, if they go out and get an Armstead. But, I mean, I'm looking at the left tackles. You have Tehran Armstead and Eric Fisher that are left. I don't trust Fisher. And so there's not much out there. It's really feeling like they're going to stick with Jonah, you know, love it or hate it.
And, you know, I fully expect Williams to play left tackle unless we sign Armstead. And I doubt we sign Armstead. But my thing is, I only see Williams playing right tackle if we sign Tehran Armstead. If we don't sign a quality left tackle, if we don't sign a top-tier left tackle, Williams is going to play left tackle. Yeah. But it's one of those things. It's interesting because then if we don't sign Tehran Armstead, which I doubt we will, then what's going to happen to right tackle? It's like a domino effect. You know, if this happens, this could happen, and then this and that. But it's interesting. But I really hope Williams could have a big year this year. And interesting, because when you start talking about, maybe he can have a good year next season, or there's some chance he would play right tackle if we sign Armstead. You mentioned, there's the excuse of him playing a new position. You also have to see if he's going to pick up his fifth-year option or not. That's something else to look into because he was a first-round pick. So there's so many different things with Williams and this offensive line. I still don't think we're going to be finished with the offensive line. I wouldn't be surprised to maybe re-sign Quentin Spain or something like that, or sign another quality offensive lineman. But, kind of going to the defensive lineman, we were able to re-sign B.J. Hill to a 3-year contract worth $30 million. 15 of that is in year one. B.J. Hill, we absolutely robbed the New York Giants this past season, trading Billy Price to get B.J. Hill. The final year of his contract, nobody really expected much of B.J. Hill, and he was great for us. Had 5.5 sacks in the regular season, had about a couple of sacks in the postseason, also had a interception in the playoffs as well, and a guy that you can put along the side of DJ Reader. And that was something that kind of concerned me as we head into this past season. Okay, we had Larry Ogunjobi, but he was a 1-year deal. We had B.J. Hill, 1-year deal. Both those guys were going to be free agents. We had DJ Reader, but he was also coming off a season-ending injury. And Larry Ogunjobi, he stepped up, and then B.J. Hill stepped up. And all of a sudden, this defense tackle group was really, really good. But, we just not had the depth because those guys, Hill and Ogunjobi were free agents. I'm really glad we were able to re-sign Hill. I think it was a great signing for us. And when you look at the 15 in year one, so we get 15 in year one and then 15 in combined years 2 and 3. This is nothing new to the Bengals. This is something they've done so many times. Front-loading contracts. They are masters at this. I mean, you look back at the Geno Atkins extension years ago. You look back at the Carlos Dunlap extension years ago. They always do this, and I think it was a great decision to do this here. Kind of get the first major year out of the way. Then if you want to cut him in a year or two, which I don't figure you would, he wouldn't have to have a ton of money and dead cap. But B.J. Hill, 3 years for $30 million, great re-sign for the Bengals, in my opinion.
Yeah, and at the way that our defensive line worked last year, we had 4 guys that were playing at a high level. Obviously, Reader and Hill and Ogunjobi, which I really wish they would have brought him back, and Josh Tupou. And Ogunjobi, we got outbid. I really thought the key to keeping this defense intact and having that solid run defense was keeping both of those guys. And, I didn't realize that Hill was going to cost as much as he did. I thought we would be able to get him for like $6-7 million. And I thought Ogunjobi maybe $8 million or so. But, Ogunjobi, they're both basically getting $10 million a year. So I understand why we couldn't keep both of them. But unfortunately, I think we're going to see the results of that on the field, because all it does is take one injury. And now you're scrambling with a rookie or Shelvin going in there, or moving Cam Sample inside where he's better outside. There's a lot of vulnerability that happens with this. And you know how it is playing defensive tackle. There's a rotation there. Those guys can't play every snap in the game. So I think Ogunjobi is a major loss. And really, and this sounds bad to say, but if I had my choice of one of them, I would have kept Ogunjobi. But I understand. I have no problem with BJ Hill. He had a great year. He overachieved. He was dynamite in the playoffs. Not just the interception, but just coming in for Ogunjobi and there being absolutely no drop off. So I definitely respect him as a player. I'm happy to have him. But if I had my choice, it would have been Ogunjobi. But if I really had my choice, it would have been both.
That's interesting. I probably would have picked Hill over Ogunjobi, but I would have loved to have both. But it was one of those situations where you have these two really good under the radar defensive tackles, and after we saw the prices of them, BJ Hill having 3 for 30, that was more than I thought he was going to have. I still like the contract. I like it. This first season is half of his contract, half of his money, just 1 year. But when you look at 3 for 30, I kind of agree with you. I thought it was going to be 6, 7, maybe 8 at the most for BJ Hill. But BJ Hill and Larry Ogunjobi, both of those guys were really, really good for us this past season. But there was just, in my opinion, it just kind of felt like throughout this regular season, both these guys are so great, but you just know we're probably not going to be able to re-sign both of these guys, even though you would love to. It just probably isn't going to happen. But BJ Hill re-signing for a 3-year deal worth $30 million. 15 in the first season. And speaking of Larry Ogunjobi, he really surprised me. I kind of thought BJ Hill would get more money because with Larry Ogunjobi, both those guys kind of played the same. But Ogunjobi ended the season on a season-ending injury, the wild card game against the Raiders. I thought that could possibly, be a factor in his contract signing. And it did absolutely not. He got more money than BJ Hill. He really honestly doubled the money per season what I thought he was going to get. I thought he was going to get to the 5 to 7 range. He signed a 3-year deal worth $40 million to go to the Bears. I like Ogunjobi, but I would not pay him that much. I'm just really surprised he signed for that much money to go to Chicago. Both these guys, BJ Hill and Larry Ogunjobi, I would have liked to re-sign either one. I was fine with Larry Ogunjobi or BJ Hill. I'm glad we signed Hill, but both of these guys, I'm very surprised at how much money each of these players got.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what happens though when you go deep into the playoffs and you go to a Super Bowl and these guys are productive, their price tag goes up. And I do stand corrected. I thought Ogunjobi was 3 years 30, but you corrected that it's 3 years 40, and 13 million is just, you can't afford that for a number 2 defensive tackle, unfortunately.
With us losing Larry Ogunjobi, which I kind of felt it was probably going to happen in the offseason, there's a couple other people, we kind of lost so far. Somebody else who we ended up losing, which I'm not really surprised about this at all. I would assume most Bengal fans are not surprised by this. Darius Phillips signed a 1-year contract worth $2 million to go to the Raiders. I just feel like Darius Phillips had potential, and it was one of those years you expect, the next year is going to be a leap of production for him, but you just never ended up seeing it. And Darius Phillips, when he had his moments to make an opportunity, he just did not live up to that. He did not make the most of his opportunity. And, we've seen that, against the 49ers when he had some, fumble losses on punt returns. But not really surprised Darius Phillips leaves Cincinnati. You have kind of any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, truthfully, I think once he gave away that game against the Niners, they were done with him for the season. We're done with him for his career. So I just don't think they wanted to bring him back. He had, in his career, I thought he had 1 year where he was kind of decent in coverage when we had some injuries. I think it was the first year that Trey Waynes was injured. But it just doesn't feel like he has a spot on this roster. So that's not surprising. I would have been very surprised if they brought him back. Teams remember stuff like that. When you burn him for a key loss, think about if we didn't lose that game. Now we're flirting with home field advantage. I know it was mid-season, so it's hard to make those predictions on what's going to happen in the future. But I really think that he was done as a Bengal when he had that, second or third fumble in that game. I forget. I think it was at 3, Jordan?
I was at that game, but I honestly don't remember. I think it was at least, 2 or 3, something like that. Then he had maybe a busted play in coverage. It was just a horrible performance.
Yeah, I know.
I kind of thought about talking about the next player the Bengals lost. Obviously, CJ Uzomah, but that was kind of a shock. But, you mentioned the 49ers game, and I have yet to talk about this, which is kind of weird. I thought I already talked about this. Jesse Bates, signs a franchise tag. He makes $13 million this season, fully guaranteed. And, when you look at that 49ers game, Jesse Bates had an opportunity to get an interception and more than likely seal the deal for the Bengals' win in that game, and he dropped it. And in my opinion, Jesse Bates is one of the best safeties in the NFL. You look at his regular season and you look at his playoffs games, there is completely different play and production. Jesse Bates played the best safety in the NFL during our postseason games. I mean, he was phenomenal in the Chiefs game, Raiders game, Titans, in the Super Bowl. He was amazing. He played like exactly how he did last year, like the best safety in the NFL. And then you look at the regular season Jesse Bates, and you're still wondering, it's at the halfway point, or Jesse Bates will turn it around. He's one of the better safeties in the NFL. Then all of a sudden, the regular season ends, and then you realize Jesse Bates never really turned that corner that you thought he was going to, because he's capable of it because he was the best safety in the NFL just a year ago. And in my opinion, Jesse Bates, he's one of the better safeties, but I feel like when you go back to that 49ers game, he had an opportunity to have a major play, and it just messed up. When you look at other plays throughout the regular season, we did not see the same Jesse Bates like we have seen in the past. I feel like Bengal fans, in my opinion, are kind of acting like the regular season never even happened with Jesse Bates. They're wanting him to sign a massive deal worth $16, $17 million. I like Jesse Bates. I would like for us to re-sign him. But I think personally, franchise tagging him is 100% the best option, because when you have a major play and a major games, you play phenomenal in the postseason, but then the regular season, you just vanish. You can't have that inconsistency. I feel like franchise tagging him is the best option because, okay, you were not really good in the regular season, but you were phenomenal in the playoffs. Let's see, for a prove-it deal, if you're great like you were in the playoffs and you were great like you were in the 2020 season, like the best safety in the NFL, then we're going to give you a contract extension, maybe 4 for 64 or like $16, $17 million, like we're seeing like with some of these guys, with probably Tehran Matthew and some of these other guys like Marcus Williams staying with the Ravens not too long ago. So to me, I feel like franchise tagging Jesse Bates is 100% the best option in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll tell you, and it wasn't popular amongst Bengal fans when they did it. There's a lot of backlash related to that because he had such a great postseason, and he had 2 years ago, the season before this one, he had a great year. But and I like him as a player, but there were multiple times this season where I'm all angry in my living room looking at my TV and saying Jesse Bates is not having a good year. Like I probably said it 6 times during the course of the year. And that's probably unfair because, you forget all the plays that he does make. You forget, he makes a tackle on the back end, but if he's not in position, there's a running back streaking down the sideline for a long touchdown. So there's a lot that goes into it. But I think, and I agree with you on the franchise tag him, keep him for another year, kind of prove yourself. But I think that he's not in the plan to sign for a big deal because I heard that he wants like $18 million. And I know that next year they're going to want to extend Burrow. And if you think about some positions that they don't pay that well in the NFL, like running backs don't get paid a lot for the most part. Safeties don't get paid a lot for the most part. Even linebackers kind of fall into that. You put a lot of money into your line and to your receivers and quarterback. Those seem like the real marquee positions. And to say, all right, we're going to extend Bates for $18 million a year and be hit with that when we're going to have to extend Burrow, we're going to have to extend Higgins, we're going to have to eventually extend Chase. Like that could be very debilitating for the organization. So even though it really is tough to hear, I think the Bengals are ready to move on from Bates after this year. And I can't say I disagree because I don't want to be cap strapped. But it's not that I don't respect him as a player. And he was amazing in the playoffs. And really, that's what matters the most. If you're going to show up in big games, then you're proving your worth more than the regular season. But I really think that this is a philosophy of the Bengals saying we're not going to pay a safety this much money, no matter if it's Ronnie Lott, no matter if it's a Hall of Famer. It's just not in our mindset to pay a safety that much money. I don't know. I'm just speculating. But I think that might have been some of the thought behind getting him for $13 million this year and, searching for his replacement next year. I mean, even sometimes you get a safety in the draft, second round that can pan out. I know that sounds crazy. Like that's what Bates was, but I'm saying, I'm not saying we're going to replace Bates with a second round pick next year and there's going to be no drop off. But I think, as I said, I don't know how much they value the safety position, and Jesse Bates is a victim of that.
And, I agree with you. I don't think that's like a hot take at all because when you look at Jesse Bates, even if Jesse Bates were to have a 2020 season, a great play in production, one of the best safeties in the NFL. In my opinion, I would still be super, super hesitant to pay them that $18-19 million because this season he was not what he should be. And it's one of those situations where you see a guy like Bates, who's one of the better players at his positions. You know his potential. You know what he's capable of. So I feel like, even though, like you say, he can make those great plays, and we don't really talk about when he messes up, it's one of those things when you're capable of it and you have that star guy, you expect more from him. But with Bates, it's so interesting because, you mentioned him being a second-round pick. When you look at, Bates was a second-round pick, I don't remember if it was that same season, the start of the 2000s, whatever year he was drafted, the beginning of that season. George Iloka got cut. I was so upset about that. George Iloka is one of my favorite Bengal players of all time. It came out of nowhere. It made no sense at the time. And I think the year before or the year or two before, he only was out of 1 or 2 snaps the entire season. He only missed 1 or 2 snaps because it was a kneel down or something crazy. But when you have a guy like Iloka, who was one of the leaders of the defense, who was, on place every single play of the game, he was always in there trying to get, a tackle and everything. And a guy like that who gets cut, I know what you mean. I don't think it's that crazy because I think Iloka was super underrated. I'm not saying Iloka was better than Bates right now, but we've already kind of seen that happen before. So who's to say we don't see it again?
Yeah, agreed. And you make a good point. I mean, I loved Iloka too. Very rare to have a 6'4" safety. That's hard to throw over when you're on the the backside. So it does make sense. He was a valuable player who they felt they could move on from at a cheaper rate. And then it was just weird. Iloka kind of fell off the map. I know he went someplace else for like a year or two, and then he was out of the league. So I guess the Bengals made a good call on him. But Jesse Bates, obviously, he looks like he's going to be around for another 5 to 10 years. But that's kind of fun that you brought up an oldie but goodie in Iloka.
It's so weird because, you look back at the moves 4 or 5 years ago, like, holy crap, what did we do? This is so stupid. Like, and then it turns out it was a good, good move and stuff like that. Like, at the time, like, I honestly, I think I cried a little bit when Iloka got cut because he was one of my favorite players. It came out of nowhere. I got a text message from my friend. I could not believe it. It was so shocking. I thought he was going to be on the team for 7 more years, and all of a sudden there's this guy, Bates. I know he's a second-round pick, but I don't think, we expected him to play as good as he has in the past several years. And then it's so crazy that even a guy like Trey Hendrickson, last season when we signed him, I was not a fan of it at all. I thought it was overpay. He's making me look more stupid by every single day he gets a sack. But I'm glad because, he's playing good. We were in a Super Bowl this past season. I would 100% take a horrible take for us to go win the AFC North and be in a Super Bowl. But, with Trey Hendrickson, a guy, who last season, not many Bengal fans thought we were going to sign him. And then you look at this, free agency, a guy who Bengal fans did think we were going to re-sign, but we didn't, with CJ Uzomah. CJ Uzomah signed a 3-year contract where it's $24 million to go selling with the Jets. I was so shocked about this. Shocked is the key word. Upset. I'm not upset. Everybody's acting upset about CJ Uzomah leaving. And I know the locker room presence, that could be kind of big for a young team who's, despite being a Super Bowl, like I said earlier, still one of the more younger teams in the NFL. But CJ Uzomah, I don't know. I feel like Bengal fans are kind of overreacting about this a little bit. He had his best season ever this past season, having the most receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns in a single season for his career. And I'm just really shocked and I'm very shocked about we did not re-sign him. I thought it was more likely that we were going to sign Uzomah than we would sign Jesse Bates. And obviously I was wrong there. But when you look at CJ Uzomah, signing with the Jets, I'm still kind of speechless about it. But I feel like when you look at the players in free agency at tight end, I feel like we are more capable of getting somebody of CJ Uzomah's caliber, or maybe even better than a CJ Uzomah this past season. When you look at Uzomah, like I mentioned, he had 49 receptions, 493 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. Gerald Everett, I talked about this on my show yesterday, before Uzomah was announced signing with the Jets. Regardless if Uzomah re-signed or not, I thought we would sign Gerald Everett. Gerald Everett last season, and 1 less game than Uzomah, had 1 less catch, 14 and 15 less receiving yards, and 1 less touchdown. And something to keep in mind, Gerald Everett also had Geno Smith throwing him the ball 3 or 4 games last season. Gerald Everett, to me, is a much, much, much better player than Bengal fans are talking about. I know some Bengal fans, maybe we can get Rob Gronkowski. That is probably not going to happen. We need to start being realistic. He's going to go back to Tampa. Gerald Everett is a guy who makes so much sense. I was saying it last season. I was saying it now. I've talked about it forever. Gerald Everett of Cincinnati is a match made in heaven for us because, honestly, I don't think he's a drop-off in production from Uzomah at all. Anything, I think he's just as good, maybe even better. And the main reason Gerald Everett will come to Cincinnati, in my opinion, is the connection with him and Zach Taylor several years ago with the Rams. Gerald Everett was on the Rams roster while Zach Taylor was the wide receiver coach several years ago before he was the head coach of the Bengals. It makes so much sense. I called it yesterday. I'm just waiting for it happens now. If it doesn't happen, I will admit that I'm wrong, and I will be shocked about that as well. But I fully expect the Bengals to re-sign Gerald Everett to be tight end number 1 to replace C.J. Uzomah signing with the Jets.
I think you make a good point because really there's nobody left on the roster. You have Drew Sample, and I mean Mason Schreck is gone. Wilcox is a free agent, but you don't know what you have there. He's more like a practice squad type. And if not, Gronkowski is going to go back to the Buccaneers, even though he expressed wanting to play with Joe Burrow. When Brady came back, that went out the window. And then you see the other tight ends go off the board. Njoku might have been an interesting thing, but the Browns franchise tagged him. Evan Ingram might have been interesting, even though he has the drop issues. He's gone. It's like there's O.J. Howard out there left and Everett. So I'm assuming they're going to go after one of them. If not, they're going to have to take one fairly high in the draft unless Thaddeus Moss turns out to be the pass catcher that we want. But again, he's not really a blocker. He's almost a glorified big receiver. So tight end is a big mystery, and I hope that you nailed it. I hope that they do pick up Everett because you're going to get the same production as Uzomah. And Uzomah's $8 million. That was too much money. They couldn't spend it on him. They loved his locker room presence. Hey, he had a nice send-off in Cincinnati. He was everybody's, funny guy, darling last year. He got to go to the Super Bowl, and, he gets to ride off into the sunset with a pretty fat deal.
And, when you look at our tight end situation, Drew Sample only has 1 year of his contract left, and that's something else. If we sign Gerald Everett, which I think we will, I will be surprised if we don't, especially with Uzomah leaving. Even if we sign Everett, I would say it's probably going to be a 1 or 2 year deal. Regardless if we sign him, I still think we attack a tight end early because Drew Sample's a free agent 1 year from now. So you're only going to have Gerald Everett under contract. That's if he signs a 2 year deal. So if you sign Gerald Everett to a 1 year contract, you're going to have Everett and Drew Sample both free agents next season. I fully expect us. I wouldn't be surprised if we attack tight end in the first 3 rounds. I'm not really big into the draft like I have been in the past because we're drafting towards the end, the first round, towards the end of the rounds, which is something we're not really used to, but it's really fun, winning the playoff games. But Jeremy Ruckert, the guy from Ohio State, I think that's somebody to possibly look at. McBride as well, and I think it's Isaiah Likely or something like that. They tied in from Coastal Carolina. Those are some of the guys, maybe second or third round to look at, because even if we sign Everett, even if it's a 2 year deal, I still think we try to get one of those tight ends because Sample is going to be a free agent. And despite Everett, in my opinion, being very underrated, and I think being just as good, maybe even better than C.J. Uzomah, I still don't see Gerald Everett being a guy who's going to be a huge part of this team. If you draft a guy like Ruckert from Ohio State, one of those guys, those are one of the guys who will have a big part of this team in the future. But Gerald Everett, to me, is somebody who makes so much sense. I really, really want it to happen. Also, somebody else to maybe look at if Everett does get signed, not by Cincinnati, is Tyler Conklin. He was a starter this past season for Minnesota because Irv Smith Jr. got hurt. He had over 60 receptions, nearly 600 receiving yards, and a couple of touchdowns as well. So, you mentioned O.J. Howard. I want to mind that. I think he's a guy who has potential but has never really got a fair chance. Any of those 3 guys I would be ecstatic by. I don't think C.J. Uzomah is as big as a loss as people think. Call me crazy. I don't really care. I think if you get any of those 3 guys, there's not a big drop-off for production from one of those 3 tight ends to C.J. Uzomah.
Yeah, I agree. You're kind of talking about all guys on the same tier. I went on record saying a few weeks back that if we signed Mike Gesicki, we'd be going to the Super Bowl again, but that's just not feasible. He was too much money. The Dolphins weren't going to let him go. And, you mentioned the draft. I'm not that up on the prospects at this point in time yet, but I know that there's only a couple tight end prospects that are forecasted for the second or third round. So maybe that's a good bet, is to try to steal one of them in round 3 or end of round 2, even though I'd like to see us go offensive line with the first 2 picks. But you really, again, we're not going to go crazy about the draft right now, but you really got to go best player available, even when you have needs, because it pays off. Remember years ago when they took Whitworth as a guard, when they were fully stocked there, and look what he became for us, because we took the best player, and the best players are going to make your team a better team. But that's enough about the draft for now.
Originally when we were going to do this video, we were going to do a 3-round mock draft, but with all the moves so far, it'd just be too hard to speculate and everything. And you mentioned, best player available. That is something Bengal fans and just NFL fans in general do not pay attention to. You always take best player available over position need. And if you have a scenario where it's a best player available and it's a position need, it's a match made in heaven. I mean, look at Jamar Chase, number 5. Look at Burrow, number 1. Look at T. Higgins at 33, the first pick of the second round. You can get those guys, and they'll be great additions to your team. And, we kind of talked about some of the guys the Bengals have signed, some of the people the Bengals have let go. We kind of briefly talked about some people the Bengals should kind of target who are still available so far in free agency. So who are some people you're kind of looking at here for the Bengals to possibly still trying to target in free agency, trying to for the Cincinnati to sign them?
It's tough at this point. I mean, like you said, Norwell's a good bet for left guard now that we have right guard settled. Trent Brown, Darrell Williams, I don't know. I mean, maybe one of those guys. I still wouldn't mind seeing them make some kind of play for Armstead. You have La'el Collins as a possible trade, possibly acquiring via trade, but he's another one. He injured his hip 2 years ago. So there's so many question marks on the guys that are left. I'm glad that we have 2 solid interiors, and I would like to maybe get one more interior lineman that has a pretty decent pedigree. And then, so what's it going to be next year? They might bring back Spain, because I thought he was our best lineman, and he's going to come at a cheap price. So we're probably looking at, Jonah, Spain, or some other mid-level signing. You're going to have Carris in the middle. You're going to have Kappa, and now you have that right tackle position. I don't think they're going to bring back Reef, because he's a year older, injury prone now. Not injury prone, but was injured. Like if they bring back Reef, then we're saying we're going in with Jonah, Spain, and Reef, and 2 new guys that aren't even top tier according to the general public, and that's almost not good enough. So I mean, if we can work right tackle, looks like it's going to have to come from the draft, unless who's left? Trent Brown, Darrell Williams. Those are the top 2 right tackles that I have on the board right now. So I think maybe right tackle comes from the draft, and it's kind of a scary proposition. And it's not the overhaul we were looking for. Or what do? You take Armstead, put him at left, and Jonah to the right, and we already talked about the potential pitfalls of that. So, I mean, they're trying to fix the offensive line. First day of free agency, they grabbed 2, totally good by me. But I'm wondering, is there enough talent out there to fix it properly? And we'll see. I mean, you never know. Maybe you get a draft pick who just Frank Pollock gets his hands on him and really works out, and there's your right tackle. But as far as the other guys on the roster, I don't see another guy coming up into that position. They re-signed Fred Johnson for like $2.5 million, which I thought was high for him, because he was inactive most of the games last year. We saw the Fred Johnson experiment when they started him at right tackle a couple of years back. That didn't quite pan out. So I don't think the guy's on our roster now. With Deontay Smith, they list him at guard. I think he's more of a tackle. Maybe they get crazy and Carmen really develops and they put him in the mix at right tackle where he played in college. I think he played a lot of right. He played some left too. I don't know. I don't have the answers. And I'm the one screaming, get 4 new offensive linemen. And I don't even know who's left to get at this point, unless we get lucky in the draft or unless Carmen really turns things around.
And when you look at it, it's so interesting because heading into free agency, our interior offensive line, left guard, center, and right guard was our main issues. But I feel like the one position up in the air just nobody knew about and still doesn't know about is right tackle, especially with our center and right guards being locked down with the signings we've made. Right tackle is still up in the air. If we would have signed Andrew Norwell at left guard, which I don't know why people are not talking about him. I've talked about it a couple of times for the past week or so. He's from Cincinnati, so obviously there's a connection there. And he's played Ohio State. When you look at Ohio State and the Bengals have drafted Ohio State players more than any other players in the draft. You look at Burrow, Sam Hubbard, Von Bell. They have a couple other guys like Eli Apple. They have so many Ohio State guys throughout these years. There has to be connection some type of there. But for whatever reason, there's not many talks about Norwell going to Cincinnati. I just don't get that at all. If we were to sign Andrew Norwell at left guard, getting I would say, upgrade over Quentin Spain, I wouldn't be opposed to signing Riley Reef to right tackle for like a 1-year deal again. Then maybe see Jackson Carman's development. But if we're going to stick with Quentin Spain, who I don't think is bad, but he's serviceable. Like Quentin Spain, I would have no issues if we re-signed him. But at the same time, if there's better offensive linemen like Andrew Norwell, I would much rather prefer Norwell. But Spain's one of those guys who's serviceable. He's not great. He's not horrible. He's good. He was, like you said, he was the best offensive lineman this past season. But regardless if he was our best offensive lineman this past season, if you're able to upgrade, you always try to do it. And I feel like that's what the Bengals should do. If they're able to get Norwell, that's an upgrade, and that's a great signing. A couple other people, right tackle, everybody's talking about La'el Collins to Cincinnati, whether it's to trade for him, but there was rumors coming today that the Cowboys might actually end up cutting him. Maybe we were to sign La'el Collins like 2 for 20, 2 for 25, something like that. And I mentioned with Riley Reef, I would expect a very similar contract. This is only if we sign like a top tier left guard. This is if we don't re-sign Spain. Reef to like a 1 for 5, 1 for 6, something like that, kind of like this past season. A couple other people here. Morgan Moses, I know he's getting up there in age, but if we're wanting to win now, and if the right tackle is really, really thin, I don't think that's a bad idea. I don't think he's been signed yet. Maybe for him for like 2 years, for 8 to 10, something like that. I already kind of mentioned Norwell. La'el Collins is somebody who's really simply is gaining momentum and everything to Cincinnati. I feel like that's one of those guys. Last year, everybody talked about Joe Thuney to Cincinnati. Everybody was dead set. Let's get Thuney to the Bengals. La'el Collins is definitely that player this year. He would be a great upgrade at right tackle, and a guy who's relatively young, has many years left in the league. I already kind of mentioned Gerald Everett a little bit. Conklin, I don't think would be bad. OJ Howard, I don't think would be bad. Kind of mentioned them earlier. One other player we briefly mentioned at the beginning of the show, J.C. Tretter, the center of the Browns. Holy crap. When I saw this, the Browns released him, I was so confused because it doesn't make sense. It looks like they're trying to create cap space to get Deshaun Watson, but why would you cut a guy like that? A center and quarterback connection is one of the most underrated and most important connections in the NFL. That's not really talked about enough. And you have a top 5 center with one of the best quarterbacks in the league, but you don't even know you're going to get him. I just don't get why Cleveland would cut him. If you're Cincinnati, you have to be all over J.C. Tretter trying to get him to come to Cincinnati. Then we're in a situation where we briefly talked about Ted Carris, a guy who played mainly left guard last season. What if he goes to left guard? We have J.C. Tretter at center, and then right guard is Alex Kappa. Then I would be completely content with signing Riley Reef at right tackle if that means we can get J.C. Tretter at center. I know I'm probably dreaming here. It's probably not going to happen. But when you look at it, I don't really think it's as crazy as it sounds. If we get J.C. Tretter or La'el Collins, Andrew Norwell, I would be so freaking happy with any of those 3. But if we were to get Norwell or J.C. Tretter, guys who are definitely upgrades to the guys we have right now, I would be perfectly fine with a guy like Riley Reese coming back. But if not, if we did re-sign Quentin Spain, maybe a guy like Collins or Morgan Moses at right tackle. But I mean, there's still so many possibilities at so many different positions. We signed a guy like Ted Carris, who as of right now looks to be our center. But then if we sign J.C. Tretter, then he's already moving to left guard, which isn't bad. I mean, he played most of his snaps to left guard last season anyway. But it's so crazy, despite the Bengals already signing some big offensive linemen to help Burrow. There's still several nice offensive linemen available that could really help us, not just this year, but in the future as well.
Jordan, you got me excited. You got me thinking of stuff I didn't think of. You're exact. If we sign Tretter, put him at center, kick Carris over to left guard, and then somehow land Collins, and then draft a first rounder, now you have a set offensive line with some depth. Yeah, those are good thoughts. And yeah, like signing Tretter would be a great idea because he's so highly rated. You're getting intel on the Browns offense because he was, calling the line calls for them last year. So it's a little bit of that, grab guys from your own division so you learn a little bit more about your opponents. And it's just I'm always shocked when a team cuts a good offensive lineman. I always think there's something going on behind the scenes. In this case, maybe it just is salary cap reasons. I'm hoping it's not like some undisclosed injury or some decline in play that we don't see being Bengal fans. I don't know, but if he plays like he has, man, you just fix the offensive line right there. Put him at center and find a way to get Collins in there.
I mean, that would be insane. And when you look at it, we pretty much get everybody back from this past season we go from a bottom 3 offensive line to, not trying to be biased, if that were to happen, at least a top 5 offensive line, I would say. I mean, all these guys, and J.C. Tretter, he's up there with Ryan Jensen. He's up there with Corey Linsley as one of the best centers in the NFL. So, yeah, we struck out Ryan Jensen. But instead of signing Ryan Jensen, if we're able to sign Ted Carris, have him at center, right guard, and left guard, a guy who could play all 3 interior offensive line positions, but we're going to have him play left guard. And then we get J.C. Tretter, who wasn't even available just a couple of days ago. I'm getting pumped just talking about this.
Yeah,
I don't think it will happen, but this would be insane. I mean, you go from Trey Hopkins, who had a 54 PFF grade, to J.C. Tretter, who's been one of the highest rated, not just centers in the NFL, but one of the highest rated offensive linemen in the NFL for the past several seasons. This would be a great move for us. If you're just now tuning in, let me know what you all think about this offensive line group. Let me know what you are thinking about me and Frank talking about the Bengals signings and people that they have kind of let go in free agency. But I mean, when you look at this offensive line, it's just so crazy because they've already done some nice moves, but the potential is there that they could still have another big time signing for us.
We got to get word over to Mr. Duke Tobin on this. We got some good ideas here for him. And all kidding aside, though, and when you think about it, if they could get Collins and Tretter for the same price they would put to Armstead, so I mean that could really fix things, providing that Jonah becomes the Jonah that we want him to become too. We're kind of forgetting about that. We're talking about all these other guys and just thinking that left tackle is nailed down, and like you said, 10 sacks last year is far from nailed down, unfortunately.
And if we're going at that situation, like if you have Williams, Ted Carris, J.C. Tretter, Alex Kappa, and Leo Collins, I mean, last season, despite Jonah Williams giving up 10 sacks, he was probably our second best offensive lineman. We're going to go into next season with Jonah Williams might be our worst offensive lineman. And that's not a knock on Williams, but that's just showing how great this offensive line could possibly be. But, I mean, it has potential to be crazy. The kind of switching topics here, I was looking at my phone, just got a notification a couple of minutes ago. The Bengals did not get any compensatory picks for this year's draft. Do you have any, kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know they used to like doing that in the past, letting more free agents get away than signing people and getting those extra picks. But they turn out to be 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round picks, and not even 3rd for the most part. And I don't, if you've listened to my show and my general thoughts, I a lot of times I don't feel like anything past the 2nd round is worth a lot. And if you look at some of our current history, Logan Wilson aside, and there are some exceptions, most of the really good players come in the 1st and 2nd rounds. So I'm not that caught up on compensatories right now. And, it's also going to add a little extra money to the cap if you have like 12 draft picks to sign. And I mean, that's a minor point, but that doesn't concern me too much. I know we have 8 picks in the draft this year because we have an extra 7th rounder from the Billy Price trade. Like we get the superior player and we get a pick, which is kind of fun. But I'm not concerned about it. I'd rather us take a loss in free agency, meaning we signed more guys than let go, than the other way around, and then just getting an extra 4th rounder who you never know what's it going to be. Maybe a rotational defensive tackle or something like that.
You mentioned, after the 2nd round, there's not really a high profile guys. It's interesting because when you look at 2nd round picks, it's crazy how many, hits the Bengals have had in the 2nd round. Dalton, Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, Bates. I mean, they've had so many, great picks at 2nd round, but they've also had some kind of dud picks, as well. When you look at Drew Sample, that pick was not really worth it the 2nd round. What's his face? Devin Still, a guy who never really pans out. Some other guys as well.
Carmen, there was Kenny Irons years ago was a running back who got hurt. in preseason, never played in the NFL. You're right.
Jerome Simpson, I think that was another second-round pick. I might be wrong. But when you look at it, it's so crazy. The second round for us is either a complete home run or a strikeout, and it looks horrible. But when you look at the mid-round picks, too, I would say after the fourth is where I kind of lose interest. There's so many, like, middle-of-the-round guys I like a lot in each year's draft. There's several ones I like this year. But when you look at, like, even the mid-rounds, I feel like this was more so, like, Marvin Lewis era, more opposed to, like, Zach Taylor era. But when you look at the guys getting Burfict, who was undrafted, the guy like Alex Erickson, who was undrafted, I know towards the end he wasn't really good, but a guy who was an undrafted free agent was really, good for us the first year or two. Looking at a guy like Husman Zada, who was a 6th or 7th round pick. Auden Tate was a 7th round pick. I had potential, but never really played much. It's so interesting when you look at the Bengals, and they'll just occasionally get those, home run, picks. Geno Atkins was a 4th round pick, and you have some of these guys who, George Aloka was a 5th round pick, and Marvin Jones was a 5th round pick as well. But when you look at some of these guys who, there's going to be these 4th and 5th, 6th round picks, 7th round picks who don't do nothing. And you're better off basically trading those picks to just kind of give a little bit more in a trade for like Leo Collins. I don't feel like getting a compensatory pick would be a bad idea here, because that would just give you a pick that you didn't have yesterday. Just go ahead and give that to Dallas to get Leo Collins or something like that. You're basically, not really giving up nearly as much because you didn't have that yesterday. But it's so interesting with some of these picks and how the Bengals can have great picks, but kind of some bad dud picks as well. But I am kind of surprised the Bengals did not get a compensatory pick. I really thought they would probably get one for A.J. Green. Kind of surprising me they didn't. And really John Ross, because when you look at last season, it made me so frustrated with just A.J. Green and John Ross last year that, John Ross did not play like any, and they did not trade him specifically. Like the rumors were they'll try to get a compensatory pick. Clearly that did not work out. He signs with the Giants. And then you look at A.J. Green, who a guy who, one of my favorite Bengal players of all time. It was just hard to watch him play, a year ago. It was just crazy. And then, honestly, I wasn't even opposed to trading him during the regular season. And then, they did not do that. They tried to keep him to try to get the compensatory pick. They don't get one for him. So both of those kind of surprised me, definitely more so on A.J. Green than opposed to John Ross. But it's really interesting. I mean, we're talking about the draft. We're talking about free agency. Free agency, these deals can officially become official tomorrow. But you have any, final thoughts on your, top free agents or final thoughts so far on the Bengals free agent signings?
I'm going to go with what we just talked about. Let's get Treader in here. Let's get Norwell in here. Maybe Armstead. I doubt it, though. The trade for Collins sounds attractive. I mean, he is coming off the hip injury, but he did play well when he was back last year. So, 2021. So that, and Everett, I think I'm agreeing with you. Just Treader and Everett, and I think it would be done with free agency. We did a great job. And then the key is signing some of our own guys too. I'm thinking we got Huber and Harris, that they're going to get like $1.5 million each. You have to bring back Harris. And then Stanley Morgan, I think, might be a candidate to bring back at $1 million or $2 million. And then I had like Wyatt Ray, just $1 million on him. He was good rotationally. And Trenton Irwin, I don't want to give up on him either. So those are guys that I would retain of our own, depending. But if retaining some of those guys comes at the expense of not being able to get another diamond offensive lineman, then I'm going to have to say goodbye to these players, even though I do like them. And one last thing on the draft, I remember the best low-round draft pick that we've had in recent years. I mean, Hushmanzada, that was a while back, but Evan McPherson, man, can you believe, in the 5th round, you're not getting anyone who's going to be that much of a difference maker unless you get really lucky. Maybe once in 20 years you might get that, and we just did it. I mean, he's going to be like the Joe Burrow of kickers for us, I'm predicting, at just because of his demeanor, his physical skill, and his mindset. He's just impenetrable. So, yeah, just to kind of cap things off, those are the free agents of ours that I'm thinking of possibly signing. I like your opinion on Treader and Everett, and Evan McPherson, man, great pickup. So that's about all I have at this point.
Now, you mentioned McPherson. I'm not going to lie. Evan McPherson was somebody I wanted in the draft, but I was mad we drafted him because where we took him. I wanted us to draft him, but I thought 5th round was kind of too early for a kicker. Obviously, that was not too early. That was a great, draft choice by us. He's won us so many games this season, not only in the regular season, but in the postseason as well. But great draft choice by us. Duke Tobin, I know you're probably not listening, but if you can give me Jonah Williams, Andrew Norwell, or, if you want to have Ted Carris at left guard, that would work too. J.C. Treader at center. I would really like that. Alex Kappa at right guard and Leo Collins at right tackle. That would make my year pretty much. I mean, that would be freaking phenomenal for us. That would be our best offseason of all time. Gerald Everett, somebody who I've talked about forever. I think he's going to sign with the Bengals. If you add that to the mix, you give me Gerald Everett and J.C. Treader. You give me Gerald Everett and Leo Collins. I'm going to be so freaking excited. Just give me two of those guys.
Super Bowl.
Over the moon of excitement.
Super Bowl.
Again, which is, it's still crazy to think about. I mean, we were in the freaking Super Bowl this past season. Last month we played in the Super Bowl. I just cannot believe it. This has been, a great time the past hour or so. If you're just not tuning in, I had Frank Laplaca from the Unofficial Bengals podcast. We talked all things Cincinnati Bengals. For agency, some guys we signed, some guys we kind of let go and they signed somewhere else. Some free agent targets. We talked about the Jesse Bates franchise tag, but lots of other things. This was really, really great. So, Frank, can you kind of tell some of the listeners who can follow you on social media?
Yes. The name of my podcast is called The Unofficial Bengals Podcast. And on social media, you can find me on Instagram or Twitter at Cincy Bengals Pod.
I'll definitely put the links in the description below. Make sure to go follow Frank on Instagram. I know some of you all are, following me on Instagram. Make sure to go follow Frank on Instagram, Cincy Bengals Pod. He has some great content. Also, check out his podcast. Put the link in the description as well. Has, weekly Bengals content. Thank you all so much for listening. You can follow me, my podcast page, the Sports Dude Hines Show on Instagram and S Dude Hines Show on Twitter. If you're new to the channel or if you've seen my videos before, I would really, really appreciate it if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel. I would very much appreciate it. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will see you all next time on the Sports Dude Hines Show.